Alright, so here we have section 5.3 from your textbook on adding and subtracting decimals, and we will still be doing this without a calculator. This entire first unit, we don't need our calculator. We need to learn the operations of the different kinds of numbers to help us out down the road. So this is not for torture. This is really to learn the basics again and reestablish how to do these just types of operations. So for adding and subtracting decimals, we're going to stack the decimal points, and you can fill in zeros when needed. And by stack, I mean they actually need to line up those decimal points and fill in zeros if you need to. So what I always say is just stack and add, but we're going to line them up. And I try to give you enough space. If you don't have enough space, remember I always keep a handy, just clean sheet of paper with me, so if I run out of room, I've got the paper. And we're just going to be nice and simple, 2 positive decimals, just practicing adding them together. So whichever one first is fine. 16.92. When you're adding, it doesn't matter which order you add in. Stack them, bring your decimal points straight down, all lined up. And we'll just add like we learned how to add. 4 plus 2 is 6. 9 plus 3 is 12. Carry the 1. 6 plus 8 is 14. Plus 1 is 15. Carry the 1. 4, 5, and 6. So 65.26. Stack and add. Same idea with the next one. $5.897 plus 4.632. Bring your decimals straight down. And that's 9, that's 12, that's 15, and that's 10. If I went too fast there, just slow down, pause it, and add them up. Stack and add. Here's the next one. $0.319 plus 0.4. So the decimals have to line up, and I'm going to add 2 zeros in there to fill in so that everything lines up. So you line up your decimals first, bring your decimal points straight down, 9170. 0.719. So stack up, line up your decimal points. Let's try that one more time. $13.761 plus 8.32. Oop, I wrote 8. Sorry, 3. Let me write that again so it's not confusing. Let's completely ignore all of that. 13.761, 8.32. Line up your decimal points. If you want to, you can put a 0 here and a 0 there so that everything lines up. We're adding these together. Bring your decimal points straight down first. This is 1, 8, 10, 11, 12, 22.081. Very, very carefully stack those up, line them up. Same idea with subtraction, stack and subtract. We're going to stick with positive for now. We'll do negative in a minute. So stack and subtract. Now with subtraction, order matters. It's very, very important. I think I mentioned in another video, you cannot pay your bills before you get paid. Order matters in subtraction. So the first number is going to go first. 28.362 minus, again, line up the decimal and insert those zeros so that everything has something underneath. And we're going to bring the decimal down and do our subtraction. Now subtraction requires borrowing, and you might have been taught to borrow different ways, but we'll kind of see as we go. 2 minus 0 is 2. 6 minus 0 is 6. 3 minus 5. Remember, we're going to borrow from the 8, change it to a 7, and put a 1 next to the 3. Becomes 13 minus 5, which is 8. This is 7 minus 6, which is 1. 2 minus 1, which is 1. So you might have been taught how to do that a little bit differently. I was taught borrowing, cross out, change it one less, and then borrow. So just however you were taught to subtract by hand, and that usually involves borrowing. So let's do that again. 146.35 minus, and we line it up carefully, 58.98. You can add that 0 right there. Lots of borrowing on this one if I remember correctly. Bring your decimal point straight down. Alright, so 5 minus 8 we're going to borrow. It's going to become 15 minus 8, which is 7. 2 minus 9 we're going to borrow, which is a 3. 5 minus 8, yeah, lots of borrowing. It's going to become a 3. That's a 7. Borrow 8. So lots of borrowing on that one. So 87.37. The next one says subtract 22.7 from 72.9. It's a very important word, from, when it comes to subtraction. We're going to see this again if you take 0308, and we'll see this again in this class as well, the word from. From means this is where you start. From means you switch the order that it's written in. So we're going to start from 72.9. 72.9 goes first, minus 22.7. And because subtraction is so particular, that order really matters. If I switch those around, I'd get a different answer. So when it says from, you put whatever the last number is first. So it's kind of backwards. I just draw that arrow so I don't forget that goes first. Then we'll do our subtraction. Bring your decimal straight down. That's 2, that's 0, and that's 5. No borrowing. Nice and easy. And the last one, subtract 6.425 from 11.81. So we start with 11.81. We line up 6.425. Let's put a 0 here, and if you want to put a 0 there, you can. Bring your decimal point down, and we are subtracting. Okay, careful borrowing here. 0 minus 5, we have to borrow, make that a 10. That would be 5. Borrow, make that a 10, that would be 8. 3, 5, 5.385. So careful subtraction, lots of borrowing on that one. So the keyword from means you start with the second number. You'll see that again throughout your math courses here, or wherever you take them, you'll see that word from a lot. Alright, the tricky one is when we're adding and subtracting with negatives and positives mixed together. And I know we're still getting a grasp on how this works, so you have to be really comfortable with kind of the procedure of adding and subtracting positives and negatives. So this is another time to practice that. So the way to approach these problems, these can be the most frustrating, is if you first want to decide if you're really adding or subtracting. It depends on the signs, and it depends on just kind of how it lines up, and I'll talk about how to make that decision. Are we really adding, or are we really subtracting? After that, you want to decide if the final answer should be positive or negative. You want to make both of those decisions before you do any work. So once you've decided if you're really adding or subtracting, and you've decided if the final answer should be positive or negative, then you work the problem and make sure that both of these conditions are met. So these two decisions, and then work the problem. So I'm going to kind of talk you through these. I'm going to separate them out. Sure I have space for all of them. Okay. So in that first one, 13.245 plus negative 18.3. I have a positive plus a negative. I'm really subtracting. Is there a difference? You're actually finding the difference between those. And the bigger number is negative, so my final answer is going to end up being negative. So you can either remember those two things in your head or just jot them down small to the side. I'm really subtracting, and the answer is going to be negative. Once you've made those two decisions, you put the bigger number on top. So 18.3, I'm going to have to add a couple zeros, minus 13.245. I decided that I'm really subtracting. I'm going to put the bigger number on top just to make it easier. And once I do all my subtracting, I'll remember to make my final answer negative. So bring your decimal down, work out your subtraction. Oh boy, borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. I always screw this one up. Can't borrow from there. That's a 2, that's a 10, 9, 10. Double borrowing there. 5, 5, 0, 5. So 5.055 is my answer, but I know it's going to have to be negative. So negative 5.055 is my final answer. And that's just using your reasoning skills, knowing if you're really subtracting or adding, and knowing if your answer should be positive or negative. That just takes some practice. All right. Negative 0.7 plus negative 0.33. They're both negative, so we're really going to add them together. And since they're both negative, my final answer will be negative. If you make those two decisions, then all you really have to do is 0.7, 0.33, add them up. And then remember that the final answer should be negative. So I think that's the cleanest approach to this, is kind of make those decisions first, and I think it makes your actual work a little smoother. Let's do that again. Negative 6.02 plus 100.5. Well, since one's a negative and one's a positive, we're really going to be subtracting. And the positive number's bigger, so my final answer will be positive. So now I'll go ahead and line them up. Since I'm really subtracting, I'm going to put the bigger number first. 100.5, I need to add a 0, minus 6.02. You can add those front zeros if it helps. Bring your decimal down, and we'll go ahead and do our subtraction. Ooh, I'm doing that wrong. That would be 4 and then 9. So 94.48. And I know my final answer should be positive. So I'm done. You can pause and try the last two, or you can just watch me. It seems to be getting difficult. It's really not. The decimals look a little messier, but the procedure is still the same. I have a positive 5.8 minus 10.03. So there's not much room, but you can do keep, change, change. A positive plus a negative is really subtracting, and the negative number's bigger, so my final answer will be negative. So I'm really subtracting, and my final answer will be negative. So this is 10.03 and 5.80. I'm really subtracting, bring my decimal down. Borrow, borrow, should get 4.23, and I know the final answer needs to be negative, so it's negative 4.23. And finally, anytime I see subtraction, I'm going to do keep, change, change, just to be consistent. So keep, change, change. So this becomes 0.8 plus positive 1.2. Positive plus positive is really adding, and my final answer is positive. So 0.8, 1.2, add them up. That's 10, 2.0. Nice last example. So again, we're adding and subtracting by hand. You'll need to remember just the basic rules of stacking and adding and stacking and subtracting, and then use your reasoning skills to help you when one's positive and one's negative. And that'll help you through these problems. All right, our next topic is multiplying decimals. Again, these just take a little bit of time. The rules are at the top. We'll go through those and then we'll go through the examples. So you're going to multiply the numbers as if there are no decimal points. Just what I call baseball multiplication, or however you learn how to multiply big numbers. You just multiply them out as if there are no decimal points. Then you're going to count the total number of decimal places. How many on the first number? How many were on the second number? Get a grand total number of decimal places. Your answer will have that many, whatever that number is, that many decimal places. You might have to add some zeros in the front to make sure it has the right number of decimal places. So we multiply the numbers as if there are no decimal places. Count the total number of decimal places. Your answer will have that many decimal places, and you might have to add some zeros in front. Again, we're doing this without the calculator, so we really have to take our time and work carefully. You can have as much blank computer paper as you need to work through these problems. So always, you can get yourself some. I always try to have some in the classroom so that we can have plenty of space to work. Tried to give you plenty of room on here, but these do take up a little bit of space. I'm going to kind of divide these up again so I don't run out of room. Okay. Make sure we've got enough space for everything. There we go. Alrighty. So 8.34 times negative 4.2. For now, let's just pretend like the negative's not there. Let's pretend like the decimals aren't there. Let's just do 834 times 42. Now, you were probably taught to multiply a little differently than I was, or maybe you learned the same technique. You start with the rightmost digit, and my teacher called it baseball multiplication. The 2 gets multiplied with the 4, then the 3, then the 8. Then you put a 0, and the 4 gets multiplied, multiplied, multiplied. So it's layers of multiplication. And if you were taught how to multiply these differently, that's totally fine. So for me, 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 8 is 16. Then I put a 0. 4 times 4 is 16, carry the 1. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 1 is 13. And 4 times 8 is 32, plus 1 is 33. So that's how I was taught how to multiply these, is what we call baseball multiplication. Then you add up your numbers. 12, 10, 5, and 3, and you get this big long number. A couple things we need to go back. We need to count up the total number of decimal places. So we have 2 on the first and 1 on the second. That's a total of 3. We start from the right, 1, 2, 3, and that is where we put our decimal point. We also need to go back and check those negatives. We have a positive times a negative, so my final answer should be negative 35.028. And again, we have to be able to do these by hand so that we understand how to multiply those decimals. Try that again. For now, let the negatives go. We'll go back to those. Or you can take care of them now. A negative times a negative is a positive, and we don't even have to worry about the negatives on this one. What we're really doing is just 63 times 4. That's all we're really worried about. And that would be 12, 25. Then we're going to count the number of decimal places total. You might want to do this with a different color. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So from the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2 So 2 extra spaces we're going to add with zeros. So we figured out that our answer is positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. So it's 0.00252. Continuing. This is really just 26 times 4. 6 times 4 is 24. 2 times 4 is 8 plus 2 is 10. And with the decimal places, we have 1, 2 decimal places. So from the right, 1, 2. And we have a negative times a positive, so my final answer should be negative 1.04. If you think you're getting the hang of this, go ahead and pause the video and you can keep working. This next one's a little tricky, but you can try the ones on the bottom row. Let's look at that tricky one. So 0.003 squared. Before you do anything, let's write out what that really is. That's really 0.003 times 0.003. So we're really just doing 3 times 3, which is 9. But we have a lot of decimal places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So write this out twice so that we know we actually are dealing with 6 decimal places. From there we start from the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is 5 extra zeros in front. And so it's 0.00009. Lots of zeros. So just be careful, take your time, and write it out. And try those bottom 4. Pause the video and try those, and then you can catch back up and see if you got them right. This is really 452 times 25. That would be 10, 26, 22, put a 0, 4, 10. Ooh, I hope I did that right. 4, 10, carry a 1, 8, 9. Okay. Add those up. 3 and 11. And then count up the decimal places. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Positive times a negative is a negative. So negative 11.3. You do not need those last 2 zeros with decimals, so it's just negative 11.3. Alright, the next one is really just 4 times 9, which is 36. And then we have to count up those decimals. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we need a couple zeros in front. We have a positive times a negative, so it's negative 0.0036. Hopefully this is making sense. Alright, our next one's really 104 times 7, which is 28. 0 times 7 is 0, plus 2 is 2. So however you work that out. Now the 7 doesn't have a decimal point. We just have 1, 2, 3 from the first one, so 1, 2, 3. Positive times a positive, so it's just 0.728.